the debate that went on at the UN, it was like, these developed rich countries, those who define values.
This is a wake-up call to the African leaders to take inventory of what is really happening in their countries. You have your natural resources. You have everything you need. President Traore is standing up. He is saying the natural resources in Burkina Faso, they belong to the people of Burkina Faso.
Traore stood alone at first, rejecting the IMF, expelling French troops. Now, Kagame is decoding the West's diplomacy, and Dr. Arikana is dismantling the legal traps they left behind. This isn't a coincidence. It's a coordinated shift, a tide threatening the empire's deepest foundations. When African leaders stop begging and start building, the old order begins to crack. Paul Kagame of Rwanda simply declared, "Western assistance to Africa is a deception." Dr. Arikana unveiled covert agreements imposed on African presidents. Captain Traore pledged to confront the West directly. But what do these three comprehend that's rattling Western dominance to its foundation? And why is their alliance so threatening? And what gives them such courage? Let's explore. When Paul Kagame addresses an audience, he doesn't shout. He doesn't brandish symbols. But with a single remark, he can ignite alarm throughout diplomatic circles in Paris, Brussels, and Washington. And that's precisely what he achieved. Not with aggression, but with calm, deliberate truth. This kind of question can only emerge from Africa. Nowhere else on this planet. Assistance is more strategic than anything else. This wasn't merely criticism. It was a frontal assault on the entire structure of Western African engagement. For generations, Western empires have concealed control behind the rhetoric of support and progress. The World Bank, USAID IMF provisions, European Union subsidies, all marketed with altruistic language, but bound by hidden restraints. Kagame unveiled the facade and expressed what many have murmured, but few have dared to proclaim. This was never genuine collaboration. It was manipulation. He charged Western benefactors with exploiting aid, not to uplift Africa, but to dominate it. A medical facility construction might be stalled unless the regime endorses a UN directive. A fiscal donation blocked unless an African leader agrees to sell off utilities or deregulate natural resources. Compassionate phrasing backed by coercive power. But Kagame went further. He turned his focus to Africa's own elite. He condemned presidents and officials who traveled to international forums, not to strategize, but to perform, to snap cheerful photos with G7 dignitaries, to appear present, not to assert influence. It's all theater. He described a spectacle. For me, when I'm watching on television and I see our leaders, who should have already been collaborating to resolve these common issues, I wait until they're summoned to Europe, to sit there and simply, honestly. The impression it creates is that we aren't even attending to solve problems. We are there for the cameras. We're pleased to sit in Paris beside the French president and discuss, and merely talk about addressing the issue. That level of frankness comes at a price. Western outlets have repeatedly labeled Kagame as authoritarian, inflexible, or resistant. But to many Africans, especially among the youth, tired of stagnation, his candor is invigorating. Because he's not requesting handouts, he's demanding truth. He interrogates the very pillars upon which modern African diplomacy is erected. If neither donor nor recipient trusts the arrangement, why maintain the performance? And this is why Kagame is viewed as a threat, not due to military strength, not because of hostile rhetoric, but because he's telling fellow African heads of stating, you're not obligated to continue the charade. On a continent where optics often overshadow integrity, Kagame's words were a revolution. He didn't advocate for violence. He called for dignity. And that, paradoxically, unnerves the West more than armed conflict. Because if one president can stand before the world and declare the partnerships fraudulent and endure, it sets a model. Others might emulate him. And that's already beginning to take shape. You see, Kagame unveiled the deception. The superficial diplomacy that's more about performance than transformation. But what unfolds when someone delves deeper? Beyond the formalities and into the paperwork, the actual agreements and intimidation that bind Africa. That's precisely what Dr. Arikana Chihombori-Quao undertook. She wasn't focused on cameras or media attention. She examined the hidden clauses. Here's a quick reminder to please like and share the video. And subscribe to Black Rebellion for more stories on Black sovereignty, Black identity, and Black hidden legacies. Let's proceed. If Kagame revealed the fiction behind Western affiliations, then Dr. Arikana unveiled the snare embedded within them. Concealed not in declarations, but in ratified agreements, confidential provisions, and threats masked as diplomacy. Dr. Arikana wasn't a military insurgent. She wasn't a fiery demagogue. She was Dr. Arikana Chihombori-Quao, a former African Union envoy to the United States. A seasoned diplomat with access to the inner gears of international authority. And what she witnessed from that position deeply disturbed her. She uncovered that current African diplomacy wasn't merely about neglect. It was about manipulation. She exposed a quiet but deadly machine. African presidents, often cornered by economic desperation, are handed contracts that look cooperative, but function like shackles. They're told to sign and warned not to question. According to Arikana, these are not merely commerce accords or developmental funding packages. These are fiscal death warrants. Embedded in the legal details are provisions that surrender oil reserves, mining privileges, telecom infrastructure, and even strategic access, for a fraction of their value or for nothing at all. And what if a leader objects? Dr. Arikana affirms the response is straightforward: regime disruption, diplomatic exclusion, public discrediting, occasionally worse. She depicts it as a 21st century scramble for Africa. Except this time, the imperialists wear ties and deliver threats in conference suits, not garrisons. The fight isn't on open fields, it's on dotted lines. She emphasized how the French colonial accord still casts a shadow over West Africa, compelling former colonies to deposit their wealth into France's central financial institution. She questioned why Africa's most resource-rich countries remain the most financially dependent. Why nations sitting atop gold, petroleum, and cobalt still beg for infrastructure loans from countries that possess none of these. Our leadership is fully conscious of the adversaries to Africa's growth, and yet somehow they remain unable to confront them. We know, when referring to West Africa, about the treaty that nations were coerced into endorsing as they gained their so-called independence. The document infamously titled, "The Pact for the Perpetuation of Colonization." On one side, independence is proclaimed, but simultaneously, they demand you endorse this paper consenting to ongoing subjugation. And if you decline to endorse this document in my possession, I hold a weapon engraved with your identity. That's how Guinea and Mali. They rejected the agreement. History confirms that France retaliated by entering those territories, dumping cement into ports, uprooting water systems, wrecking clinics, schools, roadways. Any asset could be dismantled. They destroyed it. Anything portable was confiscated and repatriated to France. As the president remarked, they even seized the final pencil. Arikana didn't conclude with denunciation. She identified the apparatus. She spoke of the economic hitman strategy, a phrase introduced by insiders, where a Western authority or monetary agency coerces an African president into accepting exploitative conditions. If he complies, he receives accolades, perhaps a monument in some Western metropolis. If he resists, the crisis unfolds. A military coup, a surge of turmoil, a foreign-funded resistance faction, or sanctions so intense they cripple the nation into submission. And if he dares to speak out, he's branded a tyrant by global news outlets, regardless of how democratic he may be at home. Arikana stated that most African heads of state are aware of this charade. They go along not from ignorance, but from fear. Fear of being toppled, of being cut off, of becoming the next headline African autocrat ousted. She cited numerous incidents, from leadership in the Sahel who defied French dominance, to others who merely attempted to reclaim their own resources and were instantly hit with financial ruin. The warning is uniform independence may exist on parchment, but not in reality. And this is why her message carried such risk. Because it wasn't just a political critique. It was a field manual, a decoded layout of how neo-colonialism now operates, via signatures, not shackles. And once that blueprint circulates, it becomes harder for elite players to hide behind buzzwords and polished speeches. Dr. Arikana did more than raise awareness. She aligned herself with those already pushing back. She spotlighted a new archetype of African leadership, unbought, unbothered by exclusion, and unflinching in conviction. Leaders like Captain Ibrahim Traoré. To her, Traoré wasn't a challenge. He was confirmation. Confirmation that Africa could reject submission, that a nation could decline agreements, expel occupying troops, reclaim assets, and still endure. Shaken, perhaps, but not subdued. She emphasized that what befell Traoré, the retaliation, the diplomatic cold shoulder, the plotted overthrows, wasn't accidental. It was retribution, and it was expected. Which raises a chilling question: how many African presidents have relinquished their nation's destinies not for profit, but out of panic? Dr. Arikana clarified genuine freedom won't be secured through declarations or ballots. It will arrive through resistance. Resistance to pacts, stipulations, and external domination. And if Africa is to obtain that liberty, it must brace for what comes next. The strain, the assaults, the price of defiance. And that's precisely what Ibrahim Traoré is undertaking. He didn't merely reject. He declared, never again, and fortified his country for the storm ahead. If Kagame shattered the fantasy of equality, and Dr. Arikana revealed the snare behind diplomacy, then Captain Ibrahim Traoré took an even more perilous step. He proclaimed a battle against the entire architecture. Not symbolically, not bureaucratically. He used the language the West dreads most: we will fight for authentic sovereignty. We will fight against them. There was no confusion, no diplomatic filter, no appeal for revision. What Traoré is initiating in Burkina Faso is not policy adjustment. It's upheaval. Crafted not to renegotiate deals with the West, but to nullify their dominance. And unlike many African politicians who speak fiercely overseas and concede quietly at home, Traoré is intensifying pressure from the inside. The struggle isn't rhetorical. It's systemic, martial, and financial. He's not asking for legitimacy. He's operating as though he already possesses it. When you visit our nations, our earth is scarred with cavities. Everywhere. They dig, drill, and plunder in pursuit of rare minerals like gold. Yet in many of those areas, there's not even a usable dirt road to reach the extraction sites, let alone schools, clinics, or any basic infrastructure. That's why we rose up, to seize the reins of our nations and reclaim our future with our own hands. There are countless other examples, but the moment we chose that path, emissaries arrived, not from official embassies, but from within internal proxies, messenger servants of foreign powers. These middlemen, trained and positioned to rise within our governments, act as loyal extensions of their Western handlers. We chose to cut that chain, and that, for them, was unthinkable. They came to recruit us, to offer us a seat at the table, to become part of their controlled elite, the curated African leadership that never challenges the system. This elite, groomed and disciplined to obey, remains bound to their master's design, but we rejected both the seat and the script. That's when the real assault began. They flooded our lands with mercenaries, instructors, covert agents who slipped into the Sahel under the guise of security, only to launch savage, underhanded operations against our civilians. Their aim: to stir fear, to trigger revolt, to destabilize our movement from within. And beyond the battlefield, a second war began: psychological warfare, propaganda, false narratives, lies dressed as news. But the Sahelian people have awakened, and they will never again be duped. They know their origin. They know their mission, and they know their destination. We won't allow this charade to continue. Our people have risen. not just for today, but for the generations yet to come. And to all those standing firm in this fight, we thank you. These trials do not break us. We will not shiver. We will not falter. We will stand our ground. We will fight. For real freedom, for uncompromised independence. From the day he took command in 2022, Captain Traore made it clear. This was not going to be another chapter of bold speeches, followed by IMF submission. One of his earliest actions was the expulsion of French forces, erasing the final traces of foreign military presence. Next came the shutdown of French-sponsored media, long accused of shaping colonial narratives under the guise of journalism. And then, a new call was issued, not to Paris, not to Washington, but to African nations ready to reclaim their own sovereignty. Under Traore, Burkina Faso didn't just withdraw from ECOWAS. It took initiative, forging a new axis with Mali and Niger, openly defying the pressures of a West-friendly regional system. What Western think tanks labeled instability, Traore redefined as reconstruction. What foreign pundits called dictatorship, and many Africans recognized as deliverance. A liberation from the suited sellouts who exchanged independence for photo ops at G7 summits. But this movement goes beyond France. The United States noticed the shift too, first responding with political warnings, then sanctions, and reportedly, covert interventions. Why? Because Traore's danger isn't just in his rhetoric, it's in his example. He is young, rooted in principle, and fearless. His speeches aren't tailored for foreign media outlets. They're unfiltered, spoken in fatigues, with the unmistakable weight of a man fully aware of the path he's chosen. He speaks of African ownership of African resources, of processing gold locally, of growing food independently without waiting for USAID trucks, of building financial resilience beyond Western-controlled banks. For the average Burkinab, these aren't theoretical dreams. They're urgent, everyday necessities, and that's where Traore's strength truly lies. His uprising is not just ideological. It feeds both the stomach and the soul. He speaks directly to the mothers, paying sky-high prices for imported goods while local harvests go to waste. He speaks to the miners, pulling gold from the soil only to remain poor as that wealth disappears overseas. He speaks to the youth, the same youth who once dreamed of Europe as salvation, now marching through the streets, shouting, La Révolution, a patrie à la mort. A Captain Traoré is reshaping Burkina Faso's military, not just as a shield against enemies, but as a foundation for national development. Under his leadership, soldiers don't just fight. They farm, build roads, and initiate industrial projects. In a country where infrastructure used to arrive with donor signatures and foreign blueprints, this is a revolutionary reversal. No international loans, no Western consultants, just homegrown resolve. But such defiance doesn't go unanswered. Since Traoré took charge, Burkina Faso has been increasingly isolated on the global stage. Western ambassadors packed their bags. Aid money stopped flowing. Media attacks became orchestrated. A flood of headlines painting him as a dictator, a junta leader, an authoritarian. But within Africa, a different term is gaining volume: leader. And Traoré is not leading in isolation. He is cultivating alliances across the continent, with others who now realize that sovereignty isn't a buzzword. It's a blueprint. A costly, risky, and dangerous path, but one that's becoming unavoidable. That's why he stands with Arikana's mission, to dismantle the system that demands African submission. That's why he echoes Kagame's warning, to reject hollow partnerships wrapped in diplomacy. But where Kagame exposes and Arikana dissects, Traoré confronts, not in speeches, but in trenches, not just with ideas, but with action. Some call him the heir to Sankara, but Traoré doesn't quote Sankara. He's reviving the mission Sankara was assassinated for daring to begin. And that makes him more than a threat. It makes him a precedent. Because this fight isn't just about Burkina Faso anymore. It's about what happens if one nation succeeds, if Traoré withstands the pressure, politically, economically, and militarily. then the lie that Africa must depend on Western lifelines will begin to unravel. That's why the most dangerous development isn't what Traore, Kagame, or Dr. Arikana are doing alone. It's what their convergence threatens to unlock. The question now is no longer will they resist. The question is, what happens when they resist? Together, three forces, three battlegrounds. President Kagame strips away the West's diplomatic costume. Arikana follows the chains back to the signatures and fine print. Captain Traore. He breaks the lock wide open. Alone, they disrupt. Together, they destabilize the core framework of neo-colonial control. And that's when Western fear begins. Not because of their words, but because of what their coordination might build. Because this isn't theory anymore. This is the early architecture of a new African future. Unapologetically Pan-African, rooted in mutual respect, and forged in synchronized action. For the first time in generations, a new model is forming. One where African nations no longer wait for Western approval, but move forward side by side, building with each other. The old colonial tactic, divide and dominate, relied on isolation. One loud voice could be silenced. One country could be sanctioned. But a coalition, that's a different equation altogether. And now, that coalition is being born. Each of these leaders contributes a cornerstone. Kagame offers operational foresight. He has mastered the grammar of power and knows exactly how to confront the West without handing it an easy excuse to retaliate. Kagame has walked through the fire of donor conditionalities and emerged with one of Africa's most stable governments, precisely by rejecting the long-held myth that African survival is tied to foreign aid. In this rising tide, Kagame is the tactician, the one who reads the geopolitical map like a chessboard and knows how to exploit its weaknesses without stepping on the obvious traps. Dr. Arikana brings something just as vital: institutional recall and legal precision. She doesn't speak in generalities. She speaks in clauses, signatures, legal frameworks. Her mind is a scalpel, exposing how treaties, trade deals, and development compacts have been weaponized against African states. And if this coalition is to withstand global resistance, it will need exactly that hang. Someone who understands the engine room of soft imperialism and knows how to disable it, line by line. Traore, on the other hand, is the engine itself. He's not the voice of caution. He's the strike force. He doesn't propose. He executes. His defiance is operational, structural. He is living proof that an African state can say no to Western dominance and still rise, govern, and lead. But this trio is no longer defined solely by opposition. They are increasingly being defined by construction, and that's what truly terrifies their adversaries. Because what's forming now is not just rhetoric. It's a comprehensive vision of sovereignty, where independence isn't a flag or a speech, but an entire system: economic, military, political, and cultural. And on the cultural front, the fire is burning brightest. These leaders aren't just removing Western boots. They're restoring African self-worth. They are reawakening a continental consciousness, one that speaks with pride, with precision, and with an unshakable sense of historical clarity. And the youth are listening. Across Africa, young people, who make up over 60% of the population, are tuning in, not just to what's being said, but to what's being proven. The system can be rejected. And more than that, it can be survived. And that's the greatest danger to Western dominance contagion. Because once people realize that the empire isn't invincible, once they see that life outside the IMF isn't collapse, but clarity, the demand for change becomes unstoppable. This is the revolutionary core of the trio, not because they claim perfection, but because they've shattered the illusion of inevitability. And the reaction from Western powers: predictable, a barrage of hit pieces. Sudden calls for dialogue. Pressures from multilateral lenders. Offers of cooperation masked as containment strategies. But it's too late. The momentum is no longer isolated. This is the beginning of network effect. One nation resists, another follows. One leader defies, another finds courage. One revolution sparks 10 others. And the West? It's running out of levers. Because to strike harder now would be to reveal its own hypocrisy. And to stay quiet is to concede ground. So the question becomes, what now? Will others follow this example? Or retreat in silence, fearing economic punishment? Will they choose alignment with the old order? Or join this emerging bloc of coordinated resistance, sovereign strategy, and Africa first policy? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Is this the only road to Africa's true independence? Do you want more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss a voice that's rising. At Black Rebellion, we don't just report. We uncover what others ignoring: Black struggle, Black existence, Black untold history, the stories of a people who were never meant to rise, but are rising anyway. Thanks for watching. Until the next video, stay awakened, stay bold, and stay tuned.